Good morning, DawgNation. I'm Brandon Adams, and this is DawgNation Daily, daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented today by ServPro. And we are in that zone right now where there is just a lot of news, some of it very good. Nate Frazier's coming back. Also, a lot of other action around the Georgia running back room that we'd say is good news, too. Some of it's not so good, at least for us. Great news for him. Monroe Freeling moving on to the NFL. That does leave, though, repercussions for Georgia. We'll talk about those today. We'll also have two great guests. It's Connor Riley later on. We will connect the dots of everything happening right now as Georgia's trying to put its 2026 roster together. And in addition to that, Jake Fromm going to be a part of the program here today, too. So we are jam-packed and all over all of the big stories as Georgia players are coming and going, and everybody's trying to get everything together to get ready for another big run here in 2026. So without further ado, let's get it started. It is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented today by ServPro, and it begins right now.
Today's episode of DawgNation Daily is brought to you by ServPro, cleaning, restoration, construction.
Presented by DawgNation.com, this is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans. Here's your host, Brandon Adams.
All right, a lot to do, so if you don't mind, we're going to jump right into it. We have learned since we last spoke something we were starting to believe was a pretty strong possibility, certainly definitely by yesterday, if not in days prior to that. Georgia offensive tackle Monroe Freeling is moving on to the NFL draft. Now, this is one of those things where I wish I was a better person. If I was a true unselfish person who really thought about other people instead of myself, then I'd come on here and we'd talk just for endless minutes about, how great this is for Monroe and how we wish him well and what an awesome honor to come through college and be the kind of NFL draft prospect Monroe Freeling is. And all of that's true, and we will wish him well here. But admittedly, we're pretty self-serving, and so it's hard not to, in the midst of the news about Monroe Freeling, pretty quickly pivot to what does this mean for Georgia? What about next year? And what about all of these things? It's just very easy to get into the, okay, who's next man up as Monroe Freeling goes out the door. But as a way of preventing us from doing that too much, before we get into all of that stuff, which we do need to get into, on the heels of the announcement from Freeling making it official that he is leaving, let's give him a lot of credit for what was, I think, a pretty significant turnaround for the Georgia offensive line this year. To my eyes, I think the numbers back this up. Georgia far better offensive line in 2025 than it was in 2024. I do believe the full emergence of Monroe Freeling is one of the main reasons that happened. And honestly, playing as well as he did, putting himself in the kind of NFL draft conversations that Freeling's currently a part of, well, good. I think it is, and I half joke about this a minute ago, but in all seriousness, it is really good news for Freeling to have this kind of NFL draft potential, and it is the culmination of what I can only imagine for him is a lifelong dream. So we are truly, without joking, really happy for Monroe Freeling. And it is worth pausing here for a moment to reflect on how Freeling's emergence as a player also coincided with a group that I think pretty clearly wrote a different story for itself in 2025 than it did in 2024. In fact, if you want to go back a couple of weeks ago, we talked to Monroe Freeling about that very thing, about how this unit had a lot of motivation to have a better season than one we just completed, much better than it was for that group in 2024. This is what the man of the hour, Monroe Freeling, told us about that going back just a couple of weeks ago.
Yeah, it wasn't our identity last year. As many good players as we had, it wasn't in the stats. It didn't lie. We ran for 129 yards rushing on the year, 15th in the SEC, and we took that personally. And came into this year, and number one goal is to run the rock. And so far, I think we've done that. And I think it fires up our entire team and makes our defense better too whenever they have to go against us in practice.
So obviously, I think Freeling deserves a lot of credit for that. I think we're all very happy that growth happened for the Georgia offensive line. We're not having the conversation about Georgia we had this year. winning the SEC again, making the college football playoff again, going 11-1 in the regular season. We're not having those kinds of conversations if that group didn't improve. And I would say that Freeling was one of the guys that really led the way towards that improvement. So now that we've given him the credit he deserves for that, I'm being sarcastic about this, but the truth is, it is important to say, man, what a performance from Freeling. Great job. We wish you well. You've obviously represented Georgia very well. Now that we've said all that, let's talk about the thing we actually gathered here to discuss, which is, all right, what happens now? Like, where do you go from here now that Monroe Freeling is gone? And I do think this is going to test the depth of the Georgia offensive line when you start looking ahead to 2026. And I think a lot of people are becoming very aware of something that I think has been true for a couple of years, and I think it's being proven true again here right now, that when it comes to roster construction, you can go to the transfer portal for almost anything. Or if you're Indiana, you can go to the transfer portal for seemingly everything. But for the most part, for most teams, and certainly a lot of these SEC teams, the one thing you are not going to do is you are not going to go to the portal to find an offensive lineman of the caliber of Monroe Freeling. If that is a hole in your program, you are not going to patch it up with something you find in the transfer portal. It doesn't mean that there aren't some good linemen in the transfer portal. There are, I guess, some, and there are probably some that Georgia at least has some interest in, we're maybe led to believe. But for the most part, this position, more than quarterback, more than wide receiver, more than running back, more than probably anything, and weirdly more than defensive line. I think defensive line's not easy to find in the portal either, but I think it's slightly easier, at least at the high end, to find linemen defensively in the portal than it is offensive line. This is one of those things where it is kind of homegrown or nothing. It really is. And so when you say, okay, well, what's next for Georgia now that Monroe Freeling is leaving, you got to look to what you currently have as the replacement for Freeling. And here's the good news. While you don't want Freeling to leave, and I really didn't want Freeling to leave, although I understand why he would make the decision that he made, and I am legitimately happy for him, while you would not necessarily cheer for a guy like Freeling departing from your program, Georgia at least has some building blocks already within the program that have a chance to give this a look of an offensive line that can be elite in 2026. In fact, that's a word our guest yesterday, the former Georgia All-American John Stinchcomb, used. And let's talk a little bit about what John said when he was on the program with us yesterday of, it is far, like my prediction would be, and we'll ask Connor Riley about this in a moment, but I believe he's going to back me up on this. My prediction is going to be Freeling is gone. Your left tackle moving forward is Juan Gaston. That's my prediction. We'll see if that turns out to be true, and obviously Georgia will have its own work to get all this together. But if I'm predicting something right now, that's probably what I'm predicting. Either way, a guy like Gaston becomes a much more important part of your offensive line, whatever spot he's ultimately in, because of the departure of Freeling. And what John said yesterday is, in the current age we live in, where you are leaning on your current depth, you're leaning on your current players, especially as offensive line, there's an expectation now of, you're not here to be a tourist. You're not here to watch and pay and grow. You are here to step in and play well right away. And a year ago, that's what Juan Gaston did. And next year, it's taking the next big step, which is a doozy. But we have reason to believe that Juan Gaston is ready to do that for Georgia in light of Freeling's departure. This is something that John Stinchcomb talked about yesterday. This is what he said.
When you're a part of these big programs, when you continue to recruit at the high level, get these highly talented players, the expectation is sooner rather than later, they're going to be heading to the NFL. So the expectation for a young player like Gaston to get up to speed and ready to be the starter and lose the benefit of the doubt of, hey, he's just a true freshman that is going to have some growing pains on his way. You lose that, especially going into your second season. The expectation is we're going to compete for a national championship, and if you're on the field, it's because you're ready to do so. And that standard is held for all players across the board. There is no level of, we understand that we're growing and building, and you don't have that anymore. So it's an important offseason for him.
important offseason for him indeed. And I do think that what John is speaking to there is just the new reality of we are asking more from young signees to George, especially at a position like this where your depth is being questioned, your depth is being challenged. Oh, you just lost Monroe Freeling. You need a guy to step in and play like Monroe Freeling would have played. Juan Gaston, we believe, is the sort of player that can do that, which is great. But that's not wildly exceeding expectations by being that player. As John said, this is just the cold, hard reality. That's meeting expectations if that's what you're able to do. And as John pointed out yesterday, is if that's true for a guy like Juan Gaston, who we predict will probably kick out to tackle now, for another guy that's going to occupy the interior part of the Georgia offensive line in Dontrell Glover, another one of these freshmen that stepped in and played well for you a year ago, a guy like that taking the next step is really important too. That the way the program's supposed to work is you're supposed to come in, play well, move on to the NFL draft, create space for other players, and they're supposed to step in and play just as well as the previous guy did. If the program is really humming along like it's supposed to, that's how it's supposed to work. We'll find out in 2026 if it is indeed capable of doing that. And obviously, as John told us yesterday, a guy like Dontrell Glover in the interior part of the Georgia offensive line is going to have similar responsibilities, needing to step up, much the same way a guy like Juan Gaston will now step up because of Monroe Freeling's departure to the NFL. Here is more from John Stinchcomb on that.
Dontrell, another player that stepped in, and you're so appreciative of it. Wow, how great is it to have two true freshmen that were able to contribute in such a meaningful way. But for this group to be elite, there needs to be improvement that occurs before week one of 2026. And there's a number of holes that will need to be filled, and the offensive line is certainly one of them that whether Monroe leaves or it's, you obviously Micah's gone, there's going to be opportunities for some of these younger players to step up, and for this group to be elite, they're going to need to play at that high level consistently, which at times we saw glimpses, but it's the consistency piece that moves a group from really good to that elite status.
All right, so isn't that interesting that John used the word elite in that clip we just heard 3 times? And the message here is that even with a guy like Monroe Freeling leaving this program, and Monroe has a very good chance of being a first-round pick. We'll see if he will be, but has a very good chance of being a first-round pick. Even with him leaving, as John Stinchcomb, a guy who knows it, he was an All-American offensive tackle at Georgia, won a Super Bowl with the New Orleans Saints. This is a credentialed observer here looking at the Georgia offensive line. He says, okay, Freeling is leaving, but the goal for Georgia from an offensive line standpoint is to still be elite in 2026, even if he's not here. That means, hey, guys that you depended on as a freshman, Juan Gaston, Dontrell Glover, they got to take the next step. They got to keep getting better. And other young players are going to need to step up too. And that's interesting to hear John say that way, because I do think that's also a pretty big part of the story now. Look, there was a time, I was thinking about this morning, that Georgia in 2021, when the national championship game was kind of slipping away from them, when Georgia was like, whoops, we're about to lose this game if we're not careful, they just reached onto the bench and they grabbed Broderick Jones. And they pulled Broderick Jones off the bench and put him in the game at offensive tackle, and everything just sort of changed after that, right? That was the kind of substitution that you can make in college football as recently as 2021, which kind of feels like yesterday in one respect and like 100 years ago in another respect. 2021, when you had depth, the likes of Broderick Jones as a backup offensive tackle, future first-round pick. The days of having a second group of offensive tackles that are as good as that and rival the starters that you currently have, the kind of players that you'd be just fine making a substitution in the end in the college football playoff national championship game, feels like college ball's in a very different place now than it was then, just going on 5 years later. That's not quite the depth you have. That's not quite the level of experience in the program you're maybe going to have that, as John said, you're going to have to lean on some of the young players that you have to hope that in 2026 you get a couple of guys that may do for you what a Juan Gaston and a Dontrell Glover did for you in 2025. That's why all of us need to get acquainted, I believe, with a guy like Ekene Ogboko. We've got to get good at pronouncing the name. I believe I did just pronounce it correctly. But you also got to get pretty familiar with who this is. This is arguably Georgia's top signee in 2026 for that 2026 class, probably the highest rated overall player they brought in. As John said, there may have been a future era or previous era in college football where you let a guy like that just sort of sit and learn for a couple of years. You hope he's ready to go as a junior. Not 2026. He is maybe, and I'm speculating here, but willing to do so, he is maybe your number one OT backup, your number one offensive tackle backup from the first moment he begins his college career, because that's what college football is now. You called on a Juan Gaston, a Dontrell Glover in a big way for you as freshman a year ago. In light of the departure of Monroe Freeling, your most important backup as an offensive tackle may be a guy who was in high school like 5 minutes ago. That's just the way that it goes. And Kirby Smart has warned us about this too. The day and age of having junior backup offensive tackle who's been in the program for a couple of years and played X number of snaps, not anymore. At the key positions where it matters most, you've got to assume your depth is going to be very young. Smart told us that just the other day. Take a listen.
Everybody's a young team. And you know what we're going to be next year? A young team. You know what we're going to be the year after that? A young team. Like, you're always going to be young now in college football unless you choose to say, I'm going all portal and I'm taking all old kids and I'm rolling the dice that I hit on the right ones. And some programs have taken that approach. Our approach is go get talented young players, try to keep them, but we'll always be young. We're just going to always be young. And that, I don't like, I say young in early in the season. These kids are not young. Elias Williams is not young anymore. I mean, those guys have played in a lot of tough, hard football games, and they've grown up. So we're just not a young team anymore. And I did talk about that early on because I felt that way.
So let me just sort of say it like this. We all as fans, and I'm a fan no different than you, we have to recalibrate our expectations just a little bit, because when I was looking ahead to 2026, doing that for the very first time, I come from the 2021 world of how do you put a super team together? Can Georgia have a super team in 2026? And to me, if your offensive line is bookended by Monroe Freeling, Ernest Green, by the way, we're still waiting to hear more on Ernest Green, but if you're Freeling, Green at tackle, Dontrell Glover and, who am I leaving out? At guard, Drew Bobo at center. Yeah, if that's what you're looking like when it comes to your offensive line, you have a chance to kind of be a super teamish looking offensive line. That feels pretty good, right? But the super team world is just not going to be there anymore. All of a sudden now it's not. This is the guy we've been cultivating and bringing along for a couple of years, and now we're ready to put this offensive line out there and go out and dominate the world. No, now we're pretty young. We got some guys we're hopeful for, and we just got to throw them out there and kind of hope for the best. If that's what you're doing. By the way, it's Juan Gaston. I meant to say, because if Freeling's back, Gaston and Glover your guards, Freeling and Green are your tackles, Bobo is your center. Man, you're ready to go out and dominate with that. That's an ideal offensive line. But the ideal world just doesn't exist anymore. Now it's more about what's real. What's real is, okay, you lost your guy in Freeling, but you got to hope that Gaston's ready to go. And that means a guy like Glover's going to step up in a big way. That means you're going to have another competition on another guard spot. Hope that guy's ready to step up. And a guy like Ekene Ogboko, just coming here out of high school, you got to hope he's ready to be your most important backup. And, oh, yeah, by the way, a position where a lot of injuries occur, Ogboko is maybe in the lineup at some point in time. It's not ideal, but it is what's real. And that's what college football is becoming. But as John Stinchcomb says, this is a Georgia program that is built to handle all of that. They can still be elite even in light of Freeling's departure. But it's going to be a very important offseason for all the names I just mentioned. Young-ish, or in some cases, very young offensive linemen who've got to work to take that next step and be ready in 2026 to make a name for themselves the way that Freeling did for himself in 2025. My name's Brandon Adams, and this is DawgNation Daily, daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented today by Serpro. We're glad you're with us. No matter how you get to us, live on video, 10 a.m., that's all platforms, radio noon, Athens Sports Radio 960 The Ref, Apple, Spotify, that's our podcast platform. So many different ways for you to be a part of our program. We are happy that you've done that here today. Really appreciate that. And so thankful to our friends at Serpro who make it all possible. Now, listen, I don't know that Freeling's departure leaves a true mess for Georgia. This is just how business gets done in college football here these days. But if you've got your own real legitimate mess, fire, water intrusion, weather catastrophe. If property you own and love or have the responsibility of taking care of has been damaged, no better resource for you than our friends at ServPro to help you get it all put back together like it never even happened. That's what ServPro is all about. So I want you to find them online. It's servpro.com, S-E-R-V, servpro.com for a lot more on that. Independently owned and operated, that's what each franchise is. That means you got people working hard for you to get your property restored to its previous condition. They take that very seriously, and I'm glad they do. And that's why I'm able to recommend them to you, that if it's the home you live in or a building that you own, or perhaps it's rental property that you're depending on for passive income, this is your source of retirement. Of course, anything like that, damage impacts your quality of life, the status of your investment. That's why you want it put back together like it never even happened. That's what ServPro is all about. So online, it is servpro.com for more on that today. All right, it's two great guests for us coming up in a moment. Jake Fromm before we're done, Connor Riley in a moment. Prior to that, though, let's get ready to go around the doghouse here today, poured by our friends at Mercier Orchards Hard Cider. A lot has happened since we last spoke. We did a big thing yesterday on Nate Frazier, the strong belief we had at the time that Frazier was coming back to UGA. Today we can officially report that is over and done. Frazier, to use a phrase we're going to be using a lot in the years to come, has re-signed with Georgia. Nate is on his way back. We said this yesterday. This, I think, should be celebrated as a very good thing for Georgia. It is a different age in which we're living in now than the one we grew up in, perhaps, but no less a win for Georgia to keep a guy like Frazier in the fold. I think this is a very good thing. We also find out that Chauncey Bowens is staying at Georgia for next year, and Georgia also adds a transfer running back, Dante Dowdle, out of Kentucky as well. So it's a Georgia team that, both with players coming back and a new addition to the program, is stocking up at the running back position, allowing Georgia to continue in 2026 what it did in 2025, which was take a big step forward with the running game. You know, Frazier, of course, I believe, is the biggest part of this here right now. And we talked to Nate going back a couple of weeks ago. That's one of the things that Nate said he was very proud of, which was the way in which his group, the running backs for Georgia, were able to have such a statistical improvement year over year and giving Georgia a chance to win some of the games that won this season. Nate says the commitment they showed to the running game is something that made him very proud. This is what Nate said really not all that long ago.
Because we go in day in and day out, always knowing there's room for improvement. If we rush for 200 yards one game, okay, let's go rush for 300 yards one game. We rush for 300 yards one game, okay, let's rush for 400 yards. If we found out this run was 6 yards, okay, how we get this run to be an explosive 50-yard run? Like, we try to find every single small detail. We try to be intentional with every single thing that we do to figure out ways that we can be better in the run game, and we take it very seriously. We don't mediocre with anything. We don't be lackadaisical with anything we do, because that's not the Georgia way, and Georgia's never been that way. So we try to figure out things that we can do to improve ourselves in every single way possible, week by week, to get better and improve.
And look, I think it's the belief that Frazier has and what he just said there that made him want to come back to Georgia. Of course, if the group is thriving and if he's thriving within that group, and statistically, Frazier had a pretty good season last year. He came very close to 1,000 yards. It's been a while since Georgia's had a 1,000-yard running back. Well, of course, in addition to obviously a prodigious NIL offer, that's one of the things that would want to keep a guy like Nate in the fold here at UGA. And the other thing that Nate told us, we talked to him going back to our time in New Orleans, is the way in which the running game has been elevated also has the potential of raising the fortunes for the entire Georgia offense. Here's more from Nate Frazier.
Yes, sir, it has. You know, Coach Smart said something like this: if you can run the ball and you can stop the run, you most highly have a chance of winning the game. And, you know, when you have an offense that can run the ball, it opens up the pass as well, and you can throw in a lot of play action stuff in there. So having a team that can run the ball, it gives you a better chance to win games.
Having a running back like Frazier in particular allows all that to occur too. That if you're trying to take the next step with Gunnar Stockton, you're trying to give Stockton a chance to really take the most advantage of the passing game weapons he's going to have. The threat of a guy like Frazier obviously has the chance for all of that to happen to a much greater degree. And I do think this is a situation where your play calling has to resemble your payroll just a bit. We're led to believe that Georgia probably had to spend pretty big to keep Frazier, and that means it should be no secret who Georgia's most leaned-on playmaker for next season should be. It should be a guy like Frazier. And I think that means even unlocking more stuff from him in the passing game, too. There was a time in which Georgia was very proud to throw to its running back. It seems like the last couple of years they've gotten away from some of that. You know, a guy like Cash Jones has really been your third down back, the guy you throw the ball to most prominently. But with him gone, I think a lot of that probably needs to go to Frazier. I think you want to get the most out of him, in other words, because I think he's going to stand as one of your most highly compensated players for next year. To repeat a phrase I just used, I think your play calling's got to resemble your payroll on that just a bit. So we'll see if that's the case. But either way, it was a very big day for Georgia. The running back position yesterday, getting Frazier officially over and done with, that's a very good thing. Keeping Chauncey Bowens, that's a very good thing. And a guy like Dante Dowdle, I think, brings some interesting wrinkles to the Georgia program, too. In fact, we'll talk to Connor Riley more about that in a moment. But for now, we'll say that is Around the Doghouse, poured today by our friends at Mercier Orchards Hard Cider. I love being from Georgia. I'm very proud of Georgia. All of Georgia's various regions. You know, you learn about those in school, with the Piedmont and all that kind of stuff. Well, listen, up there in the North Georgia mountains, I love it up there in particular. It's gorgeous. And I love the fact that's where Mercier Orchards comes from. A couple of 100 acres. They're growing apples and fruits, and they're really using those fruits to make some delicious things. They make more fried pies than you probably could ever imagine. I'm talking about millions over the course of a year, I think. It's amazing how many they're able to do. And they're also able to bring that great flavor to you when it comes to Mercier Orchards Hard Cider, a really fun category of beverage. And Mercier Orchards is a delicious option for you in that. The greatest, best tasting of them all for me, because they offer such a wide variety of flavors. You want something sweet like the Just Peachy, they got it for you. You want something on the more tart side like the Grumpy Granny, they got that for you too. You want it in the can, they got that at restaurants on tap. In fact, as you're out shopping or enjoying a restaurant, I want you to ask for it by name. And if they say, well, I don't know what this is, tell me more about Mercier Orchard Hard Cider, I want you to tell them what I'm telling you right now. Georgia Crone Company making delicious hard cider that we really think everybody needs to know about. So please find out more online. It's Mercier Orchards Hard Cider. Mercier is spelled Mercier. Just search it. Mercier Orchards Hard Cider. Really fun category of beverage, delicious flavor, an awesome story. We're proud to tell it for you here on DawgNation Daily and thrilled to have them as a part of Around the Doghouse. Okay, before we're done, great stuff with Jake Fromm. Also, a little more rumblings and grumblings about what has turned into, I don't know if you quite call this a controversy or not, but people are asking questions about one of the teams in the national title game. We'll tell you more about that here coming up in just a little bit. But for now, what's next for Georgia? What have we seen happen over the course of the last couple of days? Let's cover all of that and more with Connor Riley today, DawgNation Daily, presented by ServPro.
From Athens and across the SEC or wherever the recruiting trail may lead, here's a DawgNation.com insider.
We will say hello to Connor Riley here. Happy to have him. And Connor, a lot to discuss. I'm going to jump right into it. I guess I'll begin with something I said yesterday, that I think a lot of fans are forced to reckon with what college football is now compared to what it once was. And I don't mind telling you, I don't think that every change this sport's undergoing is a change for the better. I really don't. But I also think it's important to try to make peace with what you can. And when it comes to the Nate Frazier situation, I think a lot of the angst on the part of the Georgia fans on this was, I think, misplaced. To me, this is a big win and should be celebrated as good news. A player that would have been very attractive in the open market did not go on the open market. Georgia did what it needed to do to keep him in the fold. This is one of those things where I think you declare victory and move on. In my opinion, it's a waste of time to say, oh, well, he could have left, and if he would have, that would have suggested this, that would have suggested that. The fact of the matter is he didn't. Georgia recognized him as a top playmaker. They held on to him. This is, to me, how the system's supposed to work right now. Would you mind responding to that before we talk about anything else?
Yeah, I think it's a couple important things to keep in mind here with Nate Frazier. One, and I think you hit the nail on the head yesterday, the most important thing for Georgia in this current model of college football is roster retention, retaining guys and keeping them throughout their careers. I would actually say thus far, Georgia has very much succeeded in that regard. They've only had 12 players enter the transfer portal. I believe that is second fewest to Ole Miss. Ole Miss, I believe, is at 11 right now, and that number could go up. So I think Georgia has done an excellent job in that regard, and nowhere is that more apparent than Nate Frazier. Look, the reality is the running back market has, I think, been overinflated this year because of what Texas did in sort of processing out their running back room. made a very aggressive offer to try and get Jaden Baugh. He's ended up going back to Florida. You think Isaac Brown at Louisville, very explosive running back. He was someone who went into the transfer portal. Louisville ends up keeping him there. Bo Jackson at Ohio State, similar there to Nate Frazier as well. The reality is the price of the brick went up for running backs in this cycle. And Georgia, I think, absolutely had to play Nate Frazier, and I'm glad they recognized that as much. I think he's a guy who, as you saw over the course of last season, is an ascending talent. I can't help but wonder what would have happened if he had been able to play on Georgia's final drive had he not suffered an ankle injury there for Georgia in the loss to Ole Miss. And going into next season where that wide receiver room is going to look very different. And we saw how good Georgia was on the ground this year. Nate Frazier is able to take steps forward. I think that's going to open things up for this Georgia offense even further with the way they want to play and the way they want to protect games next season. So keeping Nate Frazier, it was something Georgia absolutely had to do, and they were able to do it. And I think that's huge for Kirby Smart and what he wants to continue build moving forward.
So let me give you a knee-jerk, I would say this is a fan-oriented take. I am a fan, so that's where this comes from. Because of everything you just said, I want the play calling next year to reflect the payroll. You're paying, I'm assuming, Nate Frazier a lot of money. That means, and you have every right to tell me I'm wrong, I want him on the field on third down. He had, I think, 16 receptions in 2025. I want to see that number go way up in 2026. Cash Jones had about 20 catches for Georgia. I want to see, a lot of those all going to Nate Frazier now. Nate Frazier was Georgia's leading, ball carrier a year ago, but there were 3 guys that had over 100 carries, including one of those being Gunnar Stockton. I want to see a little bit more of an imbalance going towards Frazier. Frazier had a very good statistical season for Georgia in 2025, but I want to see the limits pushed on that in 2026 to really make him, in many ways, the focal point of this offense. Am I wrong for feeling that way?
No, and I think there's easy ways to do that. I think Gunnar running a little bit less is certainly something that you're going to look for Georgia to use, especially with just how he takes hits over the course of the game. And I absolutely think that missed targeting call in that Ole Miss game on him on a pass, ironically, to Cash Jones in the first half of that game had an impact on how Gunnar played in the rest of the game. I'm not a doctor. I'm not going to say he was concussed, but I do think that changed how Gunnar played a little bit in that game. You figure some of those rushing attempts from Gunnar Stockton can go to Nate Frazier there. I'll be very interested in seeing what they end up doing with that third down role that Cash Jones occupied, because it could go to Chauncey Bowens, because I think he's somebody who's capable as well. You saw some nice plays from him during sort of the middle of the season, and I don't think he was 100% over the course of the year. But also, I've really liked what I've seen from Nate Frazier when he's been involved in the passing game. Now, yes, he's going to have to improve as a pass blocker, and I know that's not the most sexy thing to talk about, but I do think that that's going to be the most important thing to seeing Nate Frazier on the field more. But if he's able to do that, we've seen him be a difference maker in the pass catching game. He had a touchdown catch against Ole Miss the first time around. And I think that's an easy area where you see is, presuming Nate puts in the work, which we saw him do over the course of this season, he can step into an even larger role. So I'm interested in seeing how Georgia goes about balancing up the carries. It is a little bit of a less crowded running back room this year with Roderick Robinson moving on, Josh McCray, Cash Jones, guys who played important roles for this team, also moving on to the NFL there as well. So I do think that this running back room, while you do have to worry about injuries and how you go about managing that, because we've seen that impact this room in the past, I think there's a clear path going forward for Nate Frazier to take on a bigger role if Georgia is willing to make those tweaks.
What do you think Dante Dowdle, the transfer from Kentucky, fits into all of this? To me, on spec, looks a little bit like what I think they hoped Josh McCray would be. A bigger back. I think that McCray came in too big, but a bigger back that was fairly productive for Kentucky. How do you think Dowdle fits into all of this, the most recent transfer to UGA?
Yeah, I'm curious about him and what he ultimately brings, admittedly, and maybe it's because of the way the Josh McCray experience played out. I don't have huge expectations for what Dowdle could be. He's maybe a third running back, and maybe he even falls to fourth if you like what you see out of a guy like Dwight Phillips or a guy like Bo Walker and how they continue to improve in the Georgia system. Maybe Jay Lamar comes in and pops right away as a freshman there. He's a guy who's played in the SEC before. He's played at Oregon. He's got big-time college football experience. I'm not going to sit here and say what I said about Josh McCray a year ago, just given the way that we saw things turn out and how that impacted that. And along with the fact, I still think Nate Frazier and Chauncey Bowens are better running back options at this point in time for Georgia than what Dante Dowdle could bring. But I think that this is an example of Georgia saying, hey, we've got a guy who we think fits our culture, fits our system. He can come in and help. And if he's able to earn more carries because of how he practices and because of thus how he plays, maybe that does alleviate some of the burden that I think is going to fall on the shoulders of Nate Frazier this coming season.
I think offensive line is becoming maybe the most interesting position in college football because it's the hardest, I believe, to fill via the transfer portal. There are, I'm sure, some good transfer offensive linemen out there, but there aren't many. And I think that this one of the things that Georgia can still have going for it is ideally, it'd be great to have Monroe Freeling, Ernest Green as your offensive tackles, Gaston and Glover as your guards, and Drew Bobo as your center. I'll go to war with that any day of the week, but you don't get ideal in college football anymore, at least not very much. So now it seems to me, in light of the Freeling departure, it's a Gaston at tackle, I'm guessing, and a guy like Ekene Ogboko maybe becoming your most important backup now, even though he was in high school 35 seconds ago. What do you make of the Georgia offensive line now that Monroe Freeling is moving on?
Yeah, I think with Monroe moving on, he got a chance to be a first-round pick, and that's not something that I just think you can pass up. There was no, I think, financial offer that Georgia could have made that would have outweighed the possibilities that come with that. So I think you certainly understand why Freeling is moving on there. And look, to your point about the offensive tackle market, I know Jordan Seaton, the Colorado offensive lineman, just went in the transfer portal. A Florida booster is saying on X, the Everything app, that the bidding for Seaton, a guy who went to play at Colorado, who I think is about as different as a culture as there is from what Georgia likes to do, is at $2.5 million. And so I just don't think that that's going to be the type of player that Georgia goes out and wins a bidding war for. Not to say that Seaton can't be an impactful player in college football next year, because I think he will be. So I think you're looking at an Ernest Green, assuming he ends up coming back, and we'll see if that ends up being announced either today or tomorrow with the NFL draft deadline. I'm very curious about what the next steps look like for Juan Gaston. He's a little bit of a Twitter offensive lineman in that regard, and where, he went viral a lot this year for a lot of big blocks that he made. But you watch over the course of the games, he was not exactly as stellar as Twitter would have you believe in that regard. So I'm curious with him, the next steps that he takes, especially as he tries to get his body weight under control. I think he absolutely hit the nail on the head on Ekene Ogboko. This guy, we got a chance to see him a little bit at practice during that Sugar Bowl run-up, and he's a guy who he looks like how you would expect a five-star offensive tackle to look. Now, whether or not he's able to play like that right away, obviously there's going to be a lot there going about and doing that, but this is Georgia's highest rated recruit in the 2026 recruiting cycle, and he's a guy that I think Georgia expects to have some sort of role right away, maybe similar to what we saw with Gaston this year, where he sort of rotates in as that third tackle and gives Georgia better depth there. One other note that I would monitor with this Georgia offensive line, Drew Bobo, the foot injury that he suffered, the cast that he was in, if it's Liz Frank, which has been rumored and rumbled, that's a long injury, and it's not a guarantee that he's ready to go for the start of next season, if that is as long as the injury takes. So that is something to me that I'm watching throughout the season, because, look, Drew Bobo is as important as I think as any player on this Georgia team was this year. How he goes about recovering is something that I don't think should be overlooked, because I don't think, as we sit here right now in January, it's a rubber stamp guarantee that he's ready to go for the first game of the season because of the history with that injury.
Okay, so that's a very important point. Not great news necessarily, but obviously an important thing to consider. So let me give you some open space in the time we have left. I think the big one that's on my mind right now is what Ernest Green decides to do. I'm certainly hopeful that he's going to return. What else is the big stuff that's out there that we need to be aware of? I mean, obviously every fan is aware that as long as the portal's open, there's always some fear that a shocking name goes in here at the last minute. But give me a couple of things, maybe beyond the Green announcement, that are open issues for Georgia with draft declarations and portal still out there.
Yeah, maybe Lawson Lucky has a decision to make, or an announcement to make rather, but I have to think that he's going to end up coming back to Georgia next year, especially when you factor in the chance that he'll have an opportunity to play with his younger brother Carter, who's one of the early enrollees in Georgia's 2026 recruiting class. I am at least watching the wide receiver position. Georgia's already landed Isaiah Canyon there, and you and I have talked about this before. They absolutely need to get more out of their young wide receivers, your Talon Taylor, CJ Wiley, Landon Roldan. But if there's a late name that goes in at the wide receiver position, can Georgia maybe potentially get more help there than just going out and adding Canyon? Because they're going to have to replace 6 of their top 7 pass catchers from a season ago, and they're turning over a lot at the top of that wide receiver room. But if there's one number that I'm looking at, and I mentioned this a little bit earlier, it comes in regard to roster retention, because that is the most important thing for the way Georgia is currently choosing to build its program. They want to limit the amount of guys that they lose to the transfer portal. Right now, that number is at 12. And if that stays there, that's the fewest since really this current transfer portal era has opened up in the way that it has. And that would put it among the leaders in the SEC in terms of fewest transfer portal departures. Because, look, we just know Georgia's never going to be the most aggressive transfer portal team in terms of going out and adding talent, whether it be in terms of bulk or in terms of high-priced additions. But if they're able to retain this roster because of how well they've recruited, and you're able to, keep your 2025 class together, you're able to keep your 2024 class, which was the #1 ranked recruiting class in the country for that cycle. If you're able to keep those classes together, you're providing yourself championship quality depth, while having a lot of high ceiling guys allowed to continue to get better and play bigger roles, keeping Ellis Robinson around for 3 years, especially where like a year ago, we didn't really know what Ellis Robinson's role was going to be like. Now he's poised to, I think, become one of the bigger and better players in college football going into 2026. That's where roster retention and limiting the number of guys that go into the transfer portal is so important. The big losses so far for Georgia, Jonell Aguero, who's going to be competing with Rayshawn Dinkins and Khalil Barnes for playing time. A Bo Hewley, who I don't think Georgia ever really felt all that comfortable at starting, even with Monroe Freeling moving on to the next level. Georgia's done a really good job of limiting losses in the transfer portal, and Nate Frazier, none more important than that. And if they're able to continue to do that to close this out, if they finish with only 12 players going into the transfer portal, that's just bar none a great job by Kirby Smart of executing the plan that they want to in terms of keeping this roster together.
And I think that's 100% true. And I think so far, so good for me as far as the Georgia offseason goes because of everything you just said. Connor, I think your reporting on this has been outstanding. It's fun to follow all this. Honestly, it's been really entertaining for me. Obviously, not everything has been everything you wanted to be, but overall, it's been pretty entertaining. So good stuff. Thanks for your time. We'll look forward to reading more from you at DawgNation.com and hearing from you again here on DawgNation Daily, presented by ServPro very soon again, too.
Yep, as always, it was a pleasure, BA. Maybe this year we can win the Golden Globe for Best Podcast.
Maybe so. Maybe we can make that happen. Good stuff, Connor. Thank you.
Yep.
Let's take a look around the rest of the league. This is SEC Through.
As we said yesterday, no Golden Globe, but we do have a golden shoe. So funny on that. And by the way, speaking of great guests, Jake Fromm here coming up in just a moment. But prior to that, let's get ready to do an SEC Through here for a moment. And we got to talk about a couple of things. Let me do this before we get to anything else. We talk about all the things that go on in college football that are changing, and I think you can probably tell in my voice a little bit that, transfer portal, NIL, things that we've had reason to worry about, have actually turned out to be maybe not that big of a deal for them. I shouldn't say not that big of a deal. That's the wrong way to say it. They have not been as, much of a calamity as I feared they might be. That the games are still really entertaining. The sport seems to still be thriving. There's still a lot of great things happening for college football, even in light of what I would think are these potential concerns with how crazy is the portal going to make it, how wild is NIL going to make it. Well, so far, so good. College football is still finding a way to not just survive. I think it's really thriving. Games are incredibly entertaining, and people are eating this stuff up for the most part. There is, however, though, I think one really big concern that I have for college football when it comes to its future. And it doesn't get talked about as much as the other two things, NIL, transfer portal. But to me, the thing that I think is causing a huge issue with the sport right now is the mission creep that you see with the college football playoff. Y'all, the college football playoff is just not proving to be as popular, I think, as a lot of the powers that be in the sport hoped it would be. And there's all kinds of mitigating factors for this. We can talk about that for hours if you want to. But the numbers are what they were. We saw published yesterday the ratings for the Ole Miss-Miami game. And y'all, Miami's the kind of major market, formerly big brand. This is the sort of team that the college football powers want in the playoff scenario. They got it. But according to published yesterday, the Miami-Ole Miss game only averaged 15.8 million for the game this past week. Those are numbers that are right in line with what the SEC championship does. This is a national semifinal game. Those are, I would say, abysmal ratings when it comes to what the national semifinal is supposed to be. There are all kinds of reasons that's perhaps true. I'm just saying the fact is that's not a very good rating. And now you've got a situation where Heather Dinich from ESPN, she reports yesterday that even with this somewhat tepid appetite for playoff expansion, you've got the key decision makers now looking to go to a 16-team playoff for a couple of years, which I guess what the SEC wants. But Dinich's word that she used on SportsCenter yesterday is leverage. The Big Ten has leverage over the SEC, I guess because of the other votes they can get, to push this thing to a 24-team playoff. Y'all, we got to be really careful with this. We really do. The appetite for the college football playoff is not unlimited. And I would say overall, the average college football fan is less excited about the playoff than he is about the regular week-to-week stuff we see in the fall. And if you're Greg Sankey, who is the only person that seems to have any head for what college football is supposed to be, man, you got to be careful about this. This is the thing, more so than NIL transfer portal, this is to me the thing that can mess all of this up, is trading what you currently have, including your conference title games, for more playoff expansion when the public just doesn't seem to be that into it. They're just not that into it. And you can say, well, the games are played during the week as opposed to on Saturdays, and you get the NFL playoffs, and there's a long layoff. All of that is true. But those problems aren't likely to be solved anytime soon either. I'm telling you right now, I think the SEC needs to be having a very big conversation because their regular season games drawing 10 million people on the regular. Their conference title game last couple of years getting that 15, 16 million, audience. You're going to give all of it up for a playoff expansion that doesn't get better ratings than what you're currently doing? You'd be a fool to make that trade. And we'll see if the SEC gets tricked into doing it. But this, to me, is a looming problem. I'll also mention this. We talked yesterday about whispers and innuendo about the notion that Indiana's cheating. We've made it very clear. We have no accusation on that. We have no reason to believe they are. But, boy, people are saying that. Pat Forty's got a story at SI.com where he basically asks some unnamed coaches speaking anonymously about this, and their essential answer is they don't believe they're doing it because it'd be hard to get away with. Hacking into the Catapult system, which is where practice videos are held, or Spygate type stuff. This is a very weird conversation to me because no one's saying it on the record, but people are insinuating it off the record. But it doesn't seem like it's going anywhere for a team that's just absolutely dominant right now in the college football playoff. Interesting stuff. I'll also squeeze this in very quick before we get Jake Fromm. LSU got big news. Sam Leavitt does commit there. Quarterback was going to Arizona State, taking visits to all kinds of places, Miami, Tennessee, but ultimately it's LSU that steps up big. They win with Leavitt. This is the kind of quarterback you would feel like Lane Kiffin has to have. The first real big domino falling for him there at LSU, getting arguably the biggest name quarterback on the market in Sam Leavitt will make that your SEC through. And here on DawgNation Daily, we'll get ready to do our Kroger Fresh Take as we get ready to bring in the former Georgia quarterback Jake Fromm here right now. Jake, we're always happy to have you on the show, and obviously we'll get to the Georgia stuff in a moment. But let me ask you about the Indiana thing for a moment, just at the baseline level. Have you ever seen a story like this in college football ever before? And I've said this, I'm flabbergasted by it because they seem to be doing this a completely different way than I've come to believe over the course of the last couple of decades. You're supposed to be able to do it. And they're not only winning, they are dominant. I mean, back-to-back games, they blow out Alabama, and then they blow out Oregon. Jake, as you know, that is a very hard thing to do. What do you make of just how, unimaginably successful Indiana has become just like that seemingly overnight?
Yeah, still trying to figure it out, still trying to process it. Obviously, they have found a niche in finding these older football players that are kind of battle-tested, that are really good, maybe not exceptional or have a very high ceiling, but are very capable in the system that they have them in. And, man, they have a ton of experience. And, man, there is something also just about, being a 22, 23, 24-year-old versus being an 18, 19-year-old, man. Your body just goes through a lot of changes, and just it has a lot more season on it. I think Curt Cignetti is a fantastic coach. Obviously, the Heisman Trophy quarterback, and it is an unbelievable story. And there's just so many things that just happened to just fall and go their way, right? In the Oregon game, there were fumbles, and the ball, of course, just ends up going their way. And Fernando Mendoza, he is throwing 50-50 balls, to his big receiver, and just feels like every single one of these 50-50 balls he's coming down with and catching. Just kind of reminds me a lot of 2019 LSU, when just felt like all the momentum was just going their way. They could do no wrong. They're always going to come down with the football, and it's just really not much you can do, man. It just seems like their year. I am done kind of betting and picking against this team.
Me too.
This is their year. The only thing for me, and my question is if they don't win this game against Miami, is all of this for nothing? The incredible season, the story, Indiana back on the map, the Big Ten championship game, undefeated season, is all of it for nothing if they don't beat Miami.
I think it'll be forgotten a lot more easily, because we see this in basketball sometimes, where the Cinderella team makes the Final Four, or in the case of, like, say, Butler a few years ago, plays the title. But the winner of the tournament is usually a usual suspect. It's a team you would have expected before the tournament began. And this year's playoff could be the same way. Miami began the year as a preseason top 10 team. It would not have been a wild prediction at the beginning of the year to say, I think Miami is going to win it all. People were saying that. So if Indiana gets all the way to the title game and they lose to Miami, I do think it's a far less interesting story than it would be if obviously they finish this thing off. I mean, before November, this was the losingest Power 4 team in the history of college football. That's how moribund this program's been. So if just getting the title game is amazing, but it'll be forgotten over the course of time. But if you actually win the thing, it can never be forgotten.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's going to go down in the history books. And, how obviously this season is just in and of itself just absolutely incredible, but can they build on it? Is it sustainable? Is what they're doing? Is this kind of going to be etched out because, right, the red shirt and the COVID year guys are getting out of here, and can they keep up with the NIL spending? Man, I don't know, but man, I just know when I'm watching it, I see some really good football. They were a lot more physical than I thought they were going to be. They ran the ball extremely well. Mendoza, man, he plays really, really, really well. He operates so well in that system, man. He's throwing the balls he needs to. He's making the decision he needs to. Man, and their defense is really good.
Yeah, it is.
And they like, they're not just big dudes, and they're not like hole fillers. But, man, they are stunning, and they are causing havoc, and they are applying pressure on opposing offenses. And, man, you have to give them a ton of credit.
So let me ask you this as a kind of related to that. As I said before, I have no accusation to make against them. I have no reason to believe they're doing anything other than just going out and winning these games.
The only thing that kind of comes off is like, whoa, wait a minute, is like all the success that they're having on the opposing team's first drive and kind of interceptions. It's like, whoa, wait a minute. Like, what are the odds and the coincidences of that? I'm not saying they are. Like, when you take the Dante Moore, the quick out he threw in the Oregon game.
Yeah.
Like, yeah, but it was also a bad football. He was late and it was behind, and the guy made a play on it. So whether or not he knew it was coming, I have no idea. But the argument there is, hey, it was a poorly timed ball and a bad throw. So I can't speak for all the other ones. I have no idea. It's an interesting conversation, an interesting topic. I think it's very easy to throw the accusations out there because, well, it has to be for some other reason. They can't be this good, right?
Yeah.
It has to be for some other reason, but I don't know. I'm not buying it. I don't want to buy it.
Sure.
But time will tell. But I don't want to buy it. Like, I don't want that to be the thing.
I kind of don't either, because I am I've grown to love Fernando Mendoza. I'm very impressed with what they're doing. I guess I would ask it to you this way, though, which is, you played in the NFL. You obviously played big time college football. What was the level of paranoia you saw on the inside when it came to who knows what we're doing at practice, who's got, access to secret information, because this does feel like one of those things that both at the NFL and the college level, two levels of play that you know a lot about, that coaches are just always on guard for this. And I would say that the whispered accusations or insinuations is a better word to use around Indiana. These whispers, I think it speaks to the level of paranoia that coaches seem to have. What was your own experience with what you saw with coaches? I mean, how much do they believe that kind of thing actually goes on?
Yeah, some are a lot more paranoid than others. Some absolutely freak out about it. I'll never forget, it was my rookie year. I was in Buffalo, and we go and play at Miami, and I accidentally leave my QB wristband, just laying in the locker room, and guys go behind you, pick that stuff up. It's really not a big deal, but I got chewed out about it because it was a division opponent. Right. And hey, man, we can't give these guys anything, like we're going to play them and see them again. And these guys know us. And so it is a thing, whether or not they can decipher in real time and be able to make it marginally help you on the field. I don't know. That's kind of another question. I don't think you can be able to process stuff that fast and be able to actually make real-time change most of the time. But yeah, some coaches really get weirded out about it and freak out if they're left open, documents, play scripts, call sheets. Hey man, that stuff cannot leave our hands.
I want to ask you one more thing before we let you go. Let me remind folks before that, though, it's our Kroger Fresh Take with Jake Fromm here today on DawgNation Daily. Love the conversation with Jake. Always interesting insight from a guy that's played at every level. And, of course, we're glad to have him. And we're thankful to have Kroger in our lives, too, here. Because when it comes to the new year, and it's funny, it slowly ramps up, and then before you know it, I got both kids doing 1,000 different things. Our calendar's packed. That means we're driving all over the place all the time, which means we got to get as much time back as we can get. And that means Kroger Boost for grocery delivery, pickup, because after all, you get those things for free when you're a Kroger Boost member, and when you're driving around the way we are, that's a lot of miles, on the car. It's a lot of, trips to the fuel pump to get refilled. Well, how about earning twice the fuel points on the things you're already buying at your local Kroger? That's another great benefit that comes your way as a Kroger Boost member. So check out more online. It's Kroger.com/boost. That is Kroger.com/boost for more on that today. We love having Kroger as a part of what we do here on DawgNation Daily. Jake, let me bring you in to wrap it up here today on a conversation a lot of Georgia fans have been having this week, which is there was some fear for a while that, maybe Nate Frazier's leaving. We've seen running backs become pretty highly paid in the open market, I think, this offseason in a way that the NFL probably doesn't value them from a salary standpoint. And Frazier obviously is going to hear all kinds of offers. Tampering's not really a thing. People are going to do what they're going to do. And Georgia, by all accounts, seemingly has stepped up to keep him. I have said, okay, make peace with NIL, make peace with the transfer portal. Recognize this as what it is. This is a very big win. And it's not a story of, well, Frazier almost left or considered leaving. No, this is a story that a very important playmaker is staying with Georgia. I think it needs to be celebrated as a big win. It's clearly a very modern college football story, but it's a happy ending for Georgia nonetheless, I believe. Where do you come down on something like that?
Yeah, I think you have to look at it from that perspective. You cannot fault these young guys and these young men for going out and at least hearing and entertaining offers, man. You never know. Texas Tech could throw in and give you 3 times what you're making, and that is a real-time problem and thing that you have to figure out very quickly. But I think, Connor was talking about on the show, the biggest thing for Georgia going in the offseason was roster retention, and Nate Frazier being a very big, large portion of that. So, man, being able to have him on the roster, he is not only an incredible football player, he's a great leader for this team as well. Man, he provides that juice and that spark for this offense, and he's going to be your horse, man, that you go and you ride throughout the entirety of the season through this SEC schedule. Man, he's a good guy that you want on your roster when things get tough, especially late in the year.
Could you see him doing some of the Cash Jones stuff too, where Cash was almost exclusively the guy on the field on third down? Could you see those snaps going to Frazier in 2026?
Yeah, there's no telling what role that they could see or want him to play. But man, I think Georgia in general operates best, man, when there is a combination of a 1-2 punch in their system. So man, what that looks like this fall, I don't know, but I know Bobo and Kirby get it figured out.
Great stuff, Jake. Appreciate your time. Thanks for being here as part of a Kroger Fresh Take today. Fun times ahead as we think about what this Georgia team can look like in 2026. Really appreciate your insight on all that.
Yeah, thank you, Brandon. See you next week.
Yeah, great stuff from Jake Fromm. Before I get my golden shoe, let me also say this too. I think that Jake brings up an interesting point. He certainly would know this very well when it comes to when he played at Georgia, that 1-2 punch of, it was like Elijah Holyfield and DeAndre Swift in 2018. It was obviously Nick Chubb and Sonny Michel in 2017. So even with, we think, an extra load coming to Nate Frazier in 2026, still a big opportunity for a guy like Chauncey Bowens, who at times this year was playing very good football for the Dogs. There are a lot of carries to go around, even if we do believe that Nate Frazier will get leaned on perhaps in a big way. So I think that's an interesting point from Jake. He certainly knows all about that. And by the way, speaking of the Frazier news, we'll make that the theme of our golden shoe today as well. Billy Ray, who's a frequent flyer for us on X, wrote in to say this, that he's beginning to think that Kirby should give us a go Dogs when one of our players decides not to leave via the portal. I gotta tell you, I don't hate that as an idea at all. As I said, when you keep one of your guys, when you succeed with the phrase of the month so far, roster retention, I think it's a pretty big deal. So whether it's the Go Dogs type tweet you get from Kirby when you get a commit, or in the case of USC, they just officially announced this stuff. I think other programs are doing that too. Recognizing these as official declarations and celebrating them as good announcements for Georgia, I think that's probably appropriate in some form, some way. I think that Billy Ray's onto something there. We'll give him a golden shoe for that. Lousy, stinking Gators, we'll give them another L later on this fall. But for now, we'll remind you it's been 1,893 days, long time, since Florida's beaten Georgia. That's our Gator Hater Updater. Y'all have a great day. We are back tomorrow. DawgNation Daily, presented by ServPro. We'll look forward to talking to you then. And on video. I'm telling you, jam-packed shows, by the way, as we roll into our R.S. Andrews cool down. You can't cram more into an hour than that. All kinds of stuff. I mean, just a lot going on. We're doing our best to cover all of it. Hopefully, we're making good use of your time. That's a lot of information in 1 hour, though, if you don't mind me being self-serving. What's her face? Amy Poehler, she may have gotten the Golden Globe for Best Podcast, but let's see her cover that much information in 1 hour. I'm guessing she doesn't. All right, let's go to, I'll go to YouTube first. Yesterday, YouTube was an absolute disaster. We'll see if it's better today. Let's see what else. On the subject of the national championship game, 5280 Dog says if Beck can sustain long drives, that depth for Indiana could rear its head. Yeah, I mean, listen, and look, I've gotten it wrong in Indiana so many times. I'm going to honestly try not to embarrass myself any further on that. But I do believe the big front for Miami, big offensive and big defensive line, I do think that is a different animal to a degree. And, I mean, I already believe it's a bit of a magic trick how Indiana's done all of this anyway. But if you're going out and neutralizing the gigantic beef that Miami has on both of its lines, then it's just to a different level to me. I think that's true. Let's see what else. Frank Patterson says, did you see where Nitro Tuggle is playing with South Carolina? I did see that. I will tell you that I'm a little bit, and I get this way every year around this time, I feel very overwhelmed by all the portal news. I really do. There are stories every day that we haven't covered. Nitro to South Carolina. By the way, I'm going to tell you this right now, and this matters because you play them. South Carolina has had a very good offseason so far. Very good. They've kept all their big names. They've had some portal ads. Gamecocks have had a really good run during the portal window. And we haven't talked at all about that. Deuce Knight to Ole Miss. I haven't talked about that. Trinidad Chambliss suing the NCAA. We haven't really talked about that. We talked about some. We need to talk about it more. There are all kinds of stories we just haven't talked about. And I'm horrified by how much we're missing. So I feel like we do this every year. So when the portal window finally closes, we'll try to do, okay, well, here's how it all shook out. because it is so much. And we've said before, for every player, there are like 5 stories. There is the, report of so-and-so could go in the portal. Then it's choose your own adventure, decided not to. Now he is going in the portal. So that's 3 potential stories there. Then it's he take a visit here, take a visit there, landed at this place. All of these transfer stories have about 5 or 6 stories that coincide with them. And eventually it's just information overload. You cannot process it all. So, yes, I saw the Tuggle thing, but admittedly that probably just went in one ear, not the other, because it's in the midst of everything else that we're seeing right now. It is wild. Like, I wish we could spend 5 minutes talking about the Sam Leavitt thing. The Leavitt story is crazy. So, and some of y'all are more online even than I am, and you probably can help me with this. So Leavitt is on his visit to LSU, right? And it is while Leavitt is visiting LSU. Am I correct on this? This is where the Damon Williams thing breaks loose. So Lane has got Leavitt in Baton Rouge, but he is, giving you up text to Damon Williams while Leavitt is, they're at a basketball game together basically, and they're trying to get, something happening with Damon Williams, and all heck breaks loose with that. And so, there's also fake news out there too, and I don't know if this is real or not, but that there may have been some bad blood, as you might imagine, between, Leavitt and LSU on this. But honestly, some of the stuff that's online about that, I believe, might be fake. I have a fairly decent tuning fork for fake news. Some of this feels fake to me, but either way, Leavitt left without signing with LSU, so he goes take a visit to Tennessee. This is all, out there. And we know that Lane Kiffin was also spotted in Knoxville, because Lane can't do anything without posting about it. So we know he's in Knoxville. So Leavitt goes to Tennessee. Kiffin goes to Knoxville. We are led to believe that in addition to speaking to some high school coaches and things like that, giving cover for the visit, that Kiffin went to opposing SEC team's campus to recruit the player that I guess we're going to be led to believe he messed up with while he was on their campus, and eventually they got their guy. We haven't done that on the show yet. We haven't had time. It is crazy how all of this has played out. Armando Black says, did Georgia just get a defensive back? Let's see. Let me see if I can give this to you. All right. Let me see if I can get this to be official. It's not like gigantic news necessarily, but, good news nonetheless. I tell you what, the fact that you have to go into your platform and get it to switch back, I want the tweets in the order they came. I don't want popular tweets. I'll decide if they're popular. I want them in the order they came. All right, we'll see. Okay, yeah, so Gentry Williams, defensive back from Oklahoma, chooses Georgia. So obviously still stuff going on here. Portal remains open for a couple of more days. And you add Gentry Williams, and we knew, and I won't pretend to know a ton about Gentry Williams, I'm not going to pretend to, but we do know this, is that Georgia was planning on being very active, when it comes to the portal, when it comes to defensive backs, because you look at the safety position, they took a couple of years, took a couple last year that didn't quite work out, maybe the way that Georgia hoped. And then B, when you look at cornerback, where you've got, I think, 2 starters you feel very good about. Neither guy had a perfect season, but these are rising prospects for sure. DeMello and Ellis, your 2 starters at cornerback, but you're thin when it comes to depth. So Georgia needed depth at both cornerback and safety. You're also playing most of the time with 5 defensive backs on the field at least. So not surprising that Georgia goes for more defensive backs. Gentry Williams from Oklahoma. Armando, I appreciate you sharing that. Spencer Clark mentions Dylan Raiola in Oregon. Now, we did mention that yesterday. And I think the assumption here is that Dante Moore is probably going down to the NFL draft. I think that's the assumption that you're going to make on that. And I don't know. I don't know how good I think Dylan Raiola is. I don't think he's as good as Dante Moore is, I don't believe. So I don't quite know what this means for Oregon, but also admittedly, I didn't think that Bo Nix was that good before he went there either. So, perhaps, I know that's a different offense coordinator, but perhaps that's the deal. Oh, yeah, here's another one. UJ Marine brings this out. I think we did mention that DJ Lagway to Baylor, but as Marine points out, Lagway didn't sign with Baylor. Now, in this day and age, I'm not even sure that matters anyway. I hope it still does, but Lagway did not sign with Baylor. And so Lagway has been taking, or is scheduled to take, SEC visits, even though he's technically committed to Baylor. So that's another example of this, is that Lagway to Baylor was reported, but apparently that's not a done deal. So that's the other thing that's confusing about this is, even when the news gets reported, sometimes it wasn't quite as, officially official as was maybe thought to be. Garrison Tucker says, this is almost like the O.J. Simpson thing. If I did it, here's how I did it. He says, if Indiana was cheating just for fun, how would you, he says, I'm eating up all the people talking about it, even though I'm skeptical. How do you think Indiana could be cheating? Well, I think the thing that 40 wrote about was that all the practice video is contained in a system called Catapult. In fact, let me see if I can find the Pat 40 story. It's called Catapult. And I think that what some people are suggesting is, well, did they just hack into the system? And 40 wrote about this. To my knowledge, we gave you some passive-aggressive tweets yesterday, but to my knowledge, 40's the first one to actually write about this and say, here's what people are saying. And, listen, to be honest, Pat's not always my favorite of the national names. I don't have very many favorites among the national names, but be that as it may, I did think this was interesting that 40 writes at SI.com yesterday. Have you heard the assertions? Indiana is simply a product of old age, meaning their players are on average 23. He also says Indiana is only a Mark Cuban creation, meaning that Cubans donate some NIL. Then he says, most salacious of all, Indiana is cheating. This is the thing he's referencing, people saying this before. I'm trying to find the quote from him on this, where he gets a quote here from other people. My computer's not 100% cooperating right now. He says, the theories are irresponsible. Passive-aggressive posts were making the rounds on social media, use the same word I did, suggesting the Hoosiers were suspiciously well-positioned to make plays most of the night against Oregon. The inference, Indiana has access to the Ducks' practice film, headset communications, or other advanced intel. He says, I asked a coach who played against Indiana this season what he thought of this series. He says, I think it's asinine. I think they're just really blanking good. I didn't see anything when they played us other than really good players who were really well coached. He says, I didn't see their game against Ohio State, but I went back and watched the All 2022, and they just whipped them up front. He also says, I asked a power conference general manager, this is all SI.com, about the possibility of stealing practice video via the widely used Catapult software system or pirating headset communication. The GM was also dismissive, saying, it would be very difficult to steal info from Catapult and not get caught. The same for the headsets. You might be able to tap a frequency for a home game, but in the CFP, that would be highly unlikely. So here is the only thing I'll say. And I'm like, I think it's Garrison. I am skeptical, and I have no accusation to make, but I'm also like Garrison. I think it's interesting that people are insinuating this. And y'all, these well-known personalities with fairly big social media followings, they would not be saying this if one of their sources wasn't saying the same thing behind the scenes. That somebody that is closely connected to college football thinks this might be going on. That's what's the genesis of all of this. And the only thing I'm going to say is, here's the only thing I'm going to say. I think it's interesting what Jake said earlier, that how are they always guessing right at the beginning of a game? Even that's maybe not, quite what you think it is. But here is what the GM says in the quote we just read. That, well, if you did try to hack the Catapult system, it'd be hard to do it without getting caught. Here's what I think is interesting. When you look at recent cheating scandals, New England Patriots Spygate, Houston Astros banging the trash cans, Indiana Connor Stallions. For the most part, there was no huge penalty for getting caught. This to me is a huge problem for sports, is that in some cases it would take extraordinary integrity to not take advantage of potentially ill-gotten gain. And when you look around sports here right now, do you see extraordinary integrity in play? I don't know that I do, just being honest. So let's take Indiana away from this. Let's just say it's a different team. Another team allegedly might be cheating or insinuation they could be cheating. The simple fear of getting caught is not much of a disincentive because as the Astros and Michigan and the old New England Patriots show you, you don't get much punishment for getting caught. There's not even a lot of stigma around cheating. And I think it's a problem. Without getting too preachy, I do think that's a little bit of a problem because while in sports it's easy to say, well, if you're not cheating, you're not trying. You don't want banks to operate that way or other entities outside the world of sports to operate that way. The stock market, you don't want it to operate that way. So I think that tolerance for cheating is a bad thing, but I do think sports has a fairly high tolerance for cheating. I do. Without being too preachy, I do think that's the case. And so once again, to go back to Garrison's question of, well, if they weren't doing it, how would they do it? I think the way they would do it, or anyone would do it, because I really don't think they are doing it. I have no reason to think they are doing it. But the way someone would do it is very brazenly in the hopes they don't get caught. And if they do get caught, they'll just shrug it off and say, well, what are you going to do about that now? What are you going to do about it now? And Michigan, the Astros, the Patriots, what history shows us is the answer is kind of nothing. Even the public doesn't really shun it all that much. It becomes fodder for jokes, but beyond that, not much else. Unfortunately in sports right now, we have a fairly high tolerance for cheating, and I think that should probably change. Otherwise, we'll see cheating become more pervasive in other areas of life, and we don't want that. Let me get what Matt Rukavina says. He says, as a devoted Astros fan, I've definitely found myself on the opposite end of this conversation. Yeah, I mean, look, and listen, if you are a true Astros fan, obviously that's an emotional conversation for you. But for the most part, what we saw from Major League Baseball is, I think the other owners said, it's not worth it to punish them. The other owners, I just don't think wanted to. I don't think they wanted to, given the fact that a lot of their net worth is based in the comps for what their team is worth, I don't think they wanted to hurt the comp. If you punished Houston as much as they deserve to be, you would have probably devalued the organization. And I think a lot of these owners were like, well, if the Houston franchise is now worth less, that means theoretically all of our franchises are worth less, that it's just easier to keep doing business. Yeah, you cheated, you got away with it, but it's going to, even on paper, cost me some net worth to punish you for what, you did. And so therefore they just move on. And I think that without getting too preachy, perhaps too late, I think that's a problem for society. I really do. So how would a team get away with, and by the way, there are a lot of gray areas in life. If anybody ever hacked into a practice video system, that's cheating. I mean, let's just call that what it is. That's cheating. The way that you would do it is with the knowledge of, okay, we have at least some chance of nobody finding out. And if they do find out, if we've already won the title, what are they going to do? Take it from us? That's just the way it goes. Brandon Griffin says it would be easy to get practice video with current miniature drone tech, indoor or outdoor. Simply sneak in a micro drone and have it magnetically mount up on high on the roof or the light pole. Yeah, I mean, you'd be pretty surprised. I don't know about that. I mean, I know what you're saying. But I can tell you this right now, especially the guy down the road from here, 70 miles to my east, they are very, and perhaps with good reason for everything we're talking about, they are very paranoid about people and their practices. Very paranoid when it comes to that sort of thing. So it would not surprise me at all if they have binoculars out for drones and things like that. Would not surprise me at all on that. Now, that technology is only going to get better, I do realize. Drones are also regulated by the FFA too, right? You cannot fly a drone anywhere near the stadium on game day. I wonder if the campus has similar regulations during the week. UJ Marine said, did Ole Miss steal practice footage of our yoga footage? Perhaps they did. Maybe they gained an advantage by doing so. Let's see what else. Garrison says it takes about $100,000 to get a guy who can hack just about any software. You really think Mark Cuban doesn't know a guy? Well, I'm not. Let me just be very clear. I am not making an individual accusation against anyone. But once again, I don't believe this about Indiana. I really don't. I really don't. If Indiana fans find this online, let me make it very clear. I did not accuse your program of cheating, and I have not to this point. There are people who are doing so, but it's not me. But if what Garrison says is true, that you could truly hack into the system for $100,000, it's hard to believe that somebody's not done it. It just really is. It's hard to believe that somebody's not done it. I just unfortunately think a lot of cheating is going on. I do, at all levels of sports. And I think there's a big difference between a rule that's not enforced and actual cheating. For instance, a current example of a rule that's not enforced is tampering. So, yeah, and listen, years ago, you can go back and find, we made a huge deal years ago about the Miami Herald wrote a story about Tyreek Stevenson when Tyreek was still playing for Georgia, about him being a potential candidate to come to Miami. And I remember this in particular. This is many years ago. And we're like, man, the local paper in Miami is openly tampering with a player on the Georgia roster. We were going to try to enforce the tampering rule back then. That was our big mission. Well, that didn't work. I mean, tampering is a rule, but it's not enforced. Holding is a rule that's not enforced. People, and we did a thing earlier about stories we're not talking about. We never really talked about the controversy at the end of the Miami Ole Miss game about the alleged pass interference. On a Hail Mary type play, pass interference is a rule that's not enforced. It's one thing to have rules that are not enforced. To give you a different example of the same type of thing, let's go back to pre-NIL. There are some who will tell you, oh, the players were already getting paid. It just wasn't technically legal. Well, I am personally not willing to stipulate anything about what may or may not have happened in the past. I am not willing to stipulate anything. But let's say there were what were known as improper benefits being given. Was that really illegal, or was that just simply a rule that wasn't being enforced? I think you can make a case that if there were improper benefits, I don't know that there were. I'm not willing to stipulate that there were. But if there were, well, it was just simply a rule that wasn't being enforced. So it's one thing to have rules that are unenforced. Laws work the same way. In some communities at some times, jaywalking is a really big deal. You can get a ticket for jaywalking. You can get cited for jaywalking. It can't be an expensive ticket. Other communities at other times, nobody enforces jaywalking at all. This is one of those things that's a law on the books pretty much everywhere, and it is sometimes enforced and sometimes not. And at a time in which jaywalking is not enforced, we don't really think of someone who just crosses the street when he sees an opportunity to as breaking the law. Even though it's a law on the books, we just internalize that as a law that's not currently being enforced. But you let somebody get run over by a car or something like that, all of a sudden now jaywalking becomes a much bigger deal. And that's just one of the things. That's just one of the things that happens in life. So to me, there's a difference between people in football taking advantage of a rule that's not enforced and outright cheating. And I do believe if you hack into the practice software of your opponent, you have unambiguously cheated. I do believe that's the case. By the way, me mentioning the pass interference on the Ole Miss thing has brought Dennis Wilson out of the woodworks here. And yeah, I mean, Dennis, I kind of agree with you that, you know, if you're an Ole Miss fan, you really can't expect that to be called. It was a lot of contact, but we've got enough track record now. You can't really expect that to be called. I do wonder though, okay, well, how far is this going to go? And actually, I wouldn't even mind, you know, asking Davin this tomorrow maybe. Do defensive coaches now coach their players to say, hey, if it's the last play of the game, you might as well tackle them because they're not going to call it? Is this such a given now that players are coached to do it? I would wonder that. Let's see what else. G. Gray says, praise the Lord and roll tide. One of those statements I absolutely agree with. The other, I don't agree with at all. I'll let you decide which is which. Thomas Orzak says, why does BA hate on Carson Beck? Makes no difference to Georgia football if he wins or not. Get real. Thomas, with all due respect, I think we mentioned Beck, one time several days ago. I haven't mentioned him again since then. So I think you'd be hard-pressed to say it's hating on anybody. I do stand by what I said, though, that in a world of binary choices, either A or B, it'd be better for Georgia if Beck didn't win a national championship. That's just how big boy football works. It is. But it's honestly not the kind of thing that I spend a lot of emotion thinking about or talking about. We just call it like it is. But I can promise you're thinking a lot more about it than I am. I can promise you. But I appreciate you weighing in. Alan Hampton says, I used to drag race back in the 70s, and it was a belief among racers that you weren't cheating if you didn't get caught. I think there's a similar thing with those of us who grew up playing, like, say, pickup basketball where you don't have referees, where you're left to call your own fouls. In a call-your-own-foul type game, you got away with a lot of stuff because nobody wants to be the kind of person that calls a bunch of fouls. And so when people are self-policing, there is a certain standard that gets created. So in a street racing world, I mean, even that in itself, you've also chosen to violate a law. And in some communities at sometimes, especially in rural places, there was a thought of, well, okay, if we're all in the same parking lot on a Saturday night, far removed from the rest of society, then this is illegal, but it is somehow unenforced. I mean, the basis for drag racing relies on that assumption. And within that, you know, whatever the rules are for the souped up engines and things like that, you know, that's going to be policed among the participants. Pickup basketball works the same way. Golf, by the way, one of the things that makes golf such a gentlemanly pursuit is it's always been a call your own foul type of game. Unfortunately, some of that genteel behavior is exiting golf, but that's what it's always been. Brandy Loves Georgia asks a good question. I don't have the answer to this right now. I don't think we know about Zion Branch here right now. I don't think we know that. Transfer portal remains open. I don't think we have an official now. We don't have an official announcement one or another from Zion. So your guess would be as good as mine on that. It's a good question, Brandy. I don't have the answer. HB says he doesn't think Zion's going anywhere. Maybe not. Maybe not. Frank Patterson says, how about instead of Shark Week, y'all do an annual portal week? Yeah, I mean, I feel like we end up doing some of that related to some of the other SEC teams of, you know, who's in, who's out, you know, who's going everywhere. I feel like we do a decent amount of that. And we'll definitely have to do that this year because there's a lot of it. And look, I do think that while I still think high school football recruiting, especially when you're getting players who are capable of playing for you right away, is still the name of the game. Overall, the portal is getting more important. I believe that is true. Let's see what else. Let me grab some Facebook comments. Marshall Fleming says, BA, you watch NASCAR. You heard all the driver knowing they were cheating when they are getting caught on inspections. Yeah, so I was thinking about that too. There is a lot of that. But that's also one of those things where, you know, the onerous nature of the rule book of, you know, you're talking about stuff that's oftentimes like a quarter of a inch and smaller. And look, they're trying to get away with as much as they can too. That's exactly right. That's exactly right. I think it's one, and by the way, you see the same version of this in golf as well, which is, so in golf, there are clubs that are within, you know, certain specs to be conforming. You know, you have a conforming driver. And the conforming nature of the driver is, you know, how hot the club face is. A club face that's much thinner, and I'm not a scientist, but this is the basic gist of it. A club face that's thinner creates a little bit more of a spring effect, almost like a trampoline effect, and the ball travels farther. So a conforming driver can't be too thin. But here's the thing. If you don't get really close to the line, then you are leaving a lot of opportunity for success off the table. So if you're Callaway, Titleist, you know, the big major manufacturers, you want your driver to get as close to the line as you can without obviously becoming non-conforming. But here's the deal. If you've got a big swinger like, say, Roy McIlroy, if he's swinging that club over and over again, what's happening to that club face over time? Thwack, thwack, thwack. It's taking hits and getting thinner by the process. So a good driver can become non-conforming over time because solid hits right there on the club face is just going to create a thinner club face than it used to be. I don't actually think of that as cheating. Eventually the driver may become non-conforming, but that's only through use. And if you've got certain specs you've got to achieve, there is no extra morality or extra integrity to, we're going to be way ahead of, you know, the specs say this, we're going to be way ahead of this. You know, I don't think there's any extra credit for integrity or morality in that case. I think you should be right up to the line. And look, every now and then when you're talking about very precise measurements, you might go, you know, the other side of it. NASCAR is the same way. Spoiler height, you know, things of that nature. When you're talking about, you know, fractions of an inch, you should be as close to that line as you possibly can. And if there's an accidental slip one day and your camber is a little bit different, or whatever it's supposed to be, is a little bit different, you know, than the actual specs are, I don't quite think of that as cheating. Hacking into somebody's practice video, though, is pretty unambiguous. But I do get the point that you're making. Grady Darcy says, you know where there's no cheating, he says, in professional wrestling. No eye pokes, no tights being held. That's exactly right. In wrestling, the only reason they have rules, I'm talking about professional wrestling, is so the bad guys will have a way to show you that they're bad. Otherwise, you wouldn't need rules. The only reason why professional wrestling rules exist is so that we'll know who the bad guys are, because the bad guys break the rules. Except for Hulk Hogan. You go back and watch, you know, the classic Hulk Hogan matches in the 80s when he was the ultimate good guy. He still cheated. It was always a very funny thing that Hogan wrestled like a bad guy. He was a good guy, but he wrestled like a bad guy. He did things that only bad guys did. Scraped eyes. WrestleMania 4 when he helped Macho Man get the win. Ref wasn't looking. He hit Ted DiBiase with a chair. Like, that's a classic bad guy move. Like, go back and watch these 80s matches. Hogan was the ultimate good guy. Former bad guy turned good. He just kept on wrestling like a bad guy. There may be something. I don't know. I don't know if that's a metaphor for something in life or not, but it is interesting. Brian Whitaker says, I don't think Dante Moore is ready for the NFL. I think he needs another year at Oregon. I mean, I thought he was going to outplay Fernando Mendoza. Obviously, one of many things I've been wrong about when it comes to Indiana, but ultimately that's not what happened. So I don't know. It seems like NFL draft scouts do like him. Jan Armistead checking out. Jan, thanks for being here. We're going to check out in a minute here too. Ken Holcomb says use of NIL dollars for player retention like Frazier is a smart move that is better than paying an 18-year-old that you don't know for sure what you're getting. I think that's probably true. I do. I think that's the number one thing you want to do. I think now roster retention probably comes down to roster makeup probably comes down to three things. Number one most important thing is hold on to your guys. Georgia's doing that very well. Next most important thing is recruit high school players who can contribute for you right away. Third most important thing is make sure you've got enough experience in your program. Supplement that with transfers. That's sort of on the fly, but does that about sounds like it, right? Keep your guys, add some high school guys who are ready to play, supplement with experience of the portal. That's about what you got to do. By the way, I got to give a shout out here. So all I do in the morning is just sit here and talk. Everything on this show happens around me. All I do is talk. We always have a cast of characters behind the scenes who are making it possible. Well, today we broke DawgNation Daily history. For the very first time ever, we had an all-female flight crew. Kaylee and Mackenzie, two of our favorites, are producing the show today, making it happen. And I actually, to show you how, modern and whatever I am, I'm the one that pointed this out. I said, wow, look at this. It's ladies' night in the control room today. And I was going to say something. Kaylee said, wait and say something. Let's make sure the show goes well, and then you can say something. So Kaylee just reminded me. So I guess that must mean they think the show's gone okay. So shout out to the ladies out there for making this one run very smoothly today. In all seriousness, I am very, very thankful for the great people that helped this show be possible. Kaylee, you've known for a long time. Mackenzie's a little newer in our world, but you've actually heard Mackenzie's voice, whether you know it or not. And I guess you'll be hearing that again tomorrow, right? She did the voice for our Dr. Pepper Open. So there you go. So good stuff. Let us see what else. Foster Moss says, let's make it a 12. I can't do that today. Also, I've gotten a couple of nice remarks lately about my voice. A couple people yesterday said, oh, BA, you sound like you're 100% back to normal. Boy, I didn't think that yesterday. I felt like I had a couple of raspy moments. I still feel a little raspy right now. There is coming a showdown for me on this voice. I don't quite know what it's going to be. Thankfully, it did get, for the most part, better over the course of the season. I've handled it okay, but I don't know. I mean, other people at times notice more. I think people notice it when I'm not doing the show. Like a lot of things, I can come in this room and for a couple of hours, I can be whatever I need to be. But away from the show, I think people are noticing a little bit more. There is a big showdown coming over this voice issue at some point in time in this year. It was all about getting through the season, and then we'll figure it out. Well, now the season's over, and so we got to figure it out. So we're going to have to do something about the voice here. I'm not quite so sure. Dennis Wilson says, Georgia can forget about high school recruiting. Miami going to take that away, especially in Florida. Listen, I told you, Dennis, you get to say what you want to say for right now. Your team is on top. Georgia's not playing. That's a lot of power. Use it carefully. But I'm going to give you pretty wide leeway here right now because that's what we do. Grady Darcy, Gary Holt, giving the ladies a shout out. We appreciate that. Jim Blair checking in. Home of the Colquitt County Packers. By the way, more controversy involving Gainesville. What is going on there? All right. We're going to get ready to go. Baelzar says AI, BA incoming. Hope not. Here's what my hope in life is, because I am worried about AI. I think everybody should be worried about AI. I really do. I am thankful that thus far AI is mostly slop in all areas of life. I don't see AI. In most instances where I see AI, I'm pretty unimpressed. Not always, but pretty unimpressed. But But I do worry about AI. I think everybody should be worried about AI. I really do. And everybody's got to have their own personal plan for how they, attempt to manage this AI future. It's a massive, massive change, and it is taking place, and it's coming sooner rather than later. I think some disruption is almost unavoidable. So here's my plan. And this is going to sound like a joke, but I mean this real. I feel like I am just weird enough that it'd be a little hard for AI to copy. Like if I was better, if I was smoother, if I was, the most handsome guy in the world, if I never stumbled over a word, if I was more perfect, I believe it would be more difficult for AI to copy me. I'm sorry, I believe it'd be easier for AI to copy me. I really do. I think the perfect people are going to be the very first people that AI replaces, because it's pretty easy to make something antiseptic and perfect, and to me that's just more replicable than you probably realize. It's the weird stuff, and hopefully the real stuff, and hopefully I'm real. It's the weird/real stuff that's going to be a little harder to copy. It's the genuine authenticity, and hopefully I have that. So that's my plan. And listen, I may be, homeless on the side of the road one day, but that is my plan, is to stay weird, hopefully to stay real, and assume that if AI takes over the world, it'll take me over last, hopefully, maybe. That's my plan. Let's see what else. All right, we got to get ready to go. Let me go back to DawgNation.com for 1 second, and then we're going to leave. Devil Dog says we could get Raiola now with experience, maybe for less money. Yeah, I don't know how into Dylan Raiola I am, and I don't mean that in any way disrespectful, but I just don't know. I don't know how into Dylan Raiola I am. Matt Rukavina having fun with my comment to Dennis. DT, an interesting look at some technology. That's interesting. Devil Dog says someone on the forum said we need coaches that can recruit versus recruiters that can coach. Yeah, I mean, I do think in some respects the talent acquisition model is changing somewhat. The way in which you coach up the talent's changing somewhat. I do think that's true. I think we got to be careful assuming it's changing too much too fast, though. That's not necessarily as true as we maybe think that it is. So, I mean, and I'm guilty of this too. It's easy to make these wide, sweeping assumptions based on what a team like, say, Indiana's doing. But how true is that really? I think only time will tell. Randy Hall says, did Thunderlips cheat? No, in Rocky 3, I think the story there is that I think that Rocky just didn't read the room well. I think Rocky assumed that Thunderlips was just going to cooperate with whatever he wanted, and that's not how it went at all. And by the way, a few months ago, I showed my kids Rocky 3 and Rocky 4. When I tell you, one of the best experiences, for those of you who are far younger than me and you haven't had kids yet, this is one of the best things about being a dad, and hopefully one day you'll experience this. I really do think that's your highest and best use as a human. Hopefully one day you get a chance to experience this, which is when you show kids these pop cultural things that they wouldn't maybe find on their own, and they love it. It's from your childhood. Now you have this shared bond over things from your childhood. The best feeling you'll ever have. My kids were enthralled by Rocky 3 and Rocky 4. We didn't watch Rocky or Rocky 2 just because those are a little slower. Maybe when they get a little older, we'll go back and revisit those almost like a prequel. We'll treat them like prequels. But Rocky 3, Rocky 4, my kids, my son, we were watching Rocky 4, he said this out loud as earnestly as he could. This is the best movie I've ever seen. And felt so good to hear that. We've done Karate Kid. We've done a lot of that stuff. Karate Kid 2. They thought that was wild. So what a great experience it is. Cannot recommend that enough. One of the best things you'll ever do. And really no experience you have in life is as good as that sort of thing. I hope everybody gets that experience. All right. With that, we'll sign off for today. Y'all check out RS Andrews online, rsandrews.com. Air conditioning, heating, plumbing, and electric. They show up on time. They do the work that's promised, the price promised. You can trust them on all that today, including very cold Get that heating system tuned up. R.S. Andrews can show you how, and it may only cost you $99 to get that thing tuned back up to factory fresh specs. Old and decrepit maybe now, but running like new. Wouldn't that be a great way to save some money? R.S. Andrews can help you with that. So find him online, rsandrews.com, and we will see you back tomorrow for DawgNation Daily, presented by ServPro. We'll look forward to talking to you then.